let me share something life-changing with you. For the longest time, I thought fulfillment came from people around me, their love, approval, or even just their presence. I used to believe that being surrounded by the right friends or having the perfect relationship would make life whole. But let me tell you, that way of thinking brought more suffering than peace. Every time someone let me down or walked away, it felt like I was losing a part of myself. Through Buddhist teachings, I came to understand something profound. Peace doesn't come from clinging to others. It comes from letting go and turning inward. The Buddha said, "You are your own refuge. No one else can do the inner work for you." At first, this truth was hard to accept. It felt lonely, even unsettling. But over time, as I embraced the practice of mindfulness and self-awareness, I found something remarkable, a sense of freedom that nothing and no one could take away. What I'm going to share with you isn't about isolating yourself or rejecting the world. It's about realizing that everything you've been searching for, the love, the strength, the peace, is already within you. When you learn to cultivate this inner space, the constant need for external validation fades. Relationships stop feeling like lifelines, and instead they become a choice. A beautiful addition to a life that's already whole. But I know this can sound like a distant goal, especially if you've spent years seeking happiness from others. So, let me tell you a story, a simple yet powerful example of what happens when you stop leaning outward and start looking inward. There was once a woman named Annika who lived in a small, busy town. She was loved by many, her family, her friends, her colleagues. Yet, Annika always felt a strange emptiness, as though something was missing. Whenever she faced a problem, she would call someone, her sister for advice, her best friend for comfort, or her partner to distract her from the pain. One day, life threw her a curveball. Her partner left, her sister moved abroad, and her best friend became distant, caught up in their own struggles. Suddenly, Annika felt utterly alone. The people she leaned on were gone, and the weight of her emotions overwhelmed her. Feeling desperate, she decided to visit a local monastery she had heard about, but never entered. The monk there, an old, gentle man, greeted her warmly and listened as she poured out her heart. "What do I do?" she asked. "How do I feel whole again?" The monk smiled softly and pointed to a stone bowl sitting nearby. "Fill this bowl with water from the well," he said, "but be careful, it has a crack in the bottom." Annika did as he asked, but as she carried the bowl back, all the water leaked out. Frustrated, she said, "This is useless. No matter how much I fill it, it empties again." The monk nodded and replied, "This is how we live when we rely on others to fill us. No matter how much they give, it will never be enough if we don't fix the cracks within." His words stayed with Annika. She began practicing mindfulness, sitting quietly each day to face her thoughts instead of running from them. She spent time reflecting on her emotions and understanding her fears. Slowly, she felt the cracks within her starting to heal. Months later, Annika returned to the monastery, a calmness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She thanked the monk and said, "I no longer feel empty, even when I'm alone. I see now that the peace I needed was always inside me." The monk smiled and replied, "You've discovered the truth. When you stop searching for others to fix you, you realize you were complete all along." This story is one I think about often, especially when life feels overwhelming. It's a reminder that our strength doesn't come from outside, it comes from within. And if Annika could find that peace, so can you. Let me show you how. 1. Learn to be your own best company. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you truly spent time with yourself? No distractions, no phone, no noise. For many, the answer is never. And I get it. I used to avoid my own company too. Silence felt awkward, and being alone felt like failure. But through Buddhist teachings, I learned that mastering the art of being your own best company is one of the most liberating truths you can embrace. For years, I relied on others to make me feel whole. If I was upset, I'd call a friend. If I was bored, I'd plan an outing. If I was lonely, I'd scroll through social media, hoping for connection. But here's the harsh truth I had to face. Those moments of external validation didn't fix anything. They were like placing a bandage over a wound that needed stitches. Buddhism teaches that our suffering comes from attachment, our need for things, people, or circumstances to be a certain way to feel okay. And let me tell you, depending on others for your happiness is a sure path to suffering. People are unpredictable. They'll love you one moment and hurt you the next, not because they're bad, but because they're human. But the Buddha's wisdom is clear. Peace comes when we stop grasping outwardly and start turning inward. At first, being alone felt strange. I remember sitting in my living room one evening, everything quiet except for the hum of the fridge. My phone was in another room, and there was nothing to distract me. I felt restless, like I needed to fill the silence with something. But instead, I just sat there. I let the discomfort wash over me. And in that stillness, I started to notice something. I began to hear my own thoughts, my own fears, and, more importantly, my own voice. When you take time to be with yourself, you start to understand who you are. You notice what truly matters to you, what brings you joy, and what drains your energy. It's like forming a friendship with yourself, and let me tell you, it's the most important friendship you'll ever have. But this doesn't happen overnight. You can't expect to sit in silence once and suddenly feel whole. It's a practice. Start small. Spend 5 minutes each day in solitude. No phone, no TV, no distractions. Just sit, breathe, and notice what comes up. At first, your mind might race, but over time, you'll find clarity. And don't think this is about isolating yourself. Buddhism doesn't teach us to shun relationships or community. It teaches us to build inner strength so that relationships become a choice, not a need. When you're comfortable with your own company, you stop clinging to others out of fear of being alone. Instead, you connect with people from a place of love and authenticity. The Buddha said, "You yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection." Let that sink in. You deserve your own love. You deserve your own time. And when you give that to yourself, you become unshakable. So, start today. Spend time with yourself. Get to know the person you've been avoiding. I promise you, they're worth it. 2. Learn to say no. Now let's talk about a truth that might make some of you uncomfortable, saying no. Let's be honest. How often do you say yes when you really want to say no? How often do you put others' needs ahead of your own because you're afraid of disappointing them or being judged? I know the struggle well. I used to be a chronic people pleaser. If someone asked for my help, I'd say yes, even if I was exhausted. If a friend needed something, I'd drop everything, even if it disrupted my plans. And you know what? I thought this made me a good person, but deep down, I was drained, resentful, and disconnected from myself. Buddhism teaches us the importance of boundaries. It's not about shutting people out. It's about protecting your energy so you can show up as your best self. The Buddha often spoke about the concept of the middle way, a path of balance. Saying no is part of that balance. It's recognizing that you can't pour from an empty cup. The first time I said no intentionally, it was terrifying. A co-worker had asked me to take on extra work, and every part of me wanted to say yes. But I knew I couldn't handle it without sacrificing my peace. So I took a deep breath and said, "I'm sorry, but I can't take this on right now." My heart raced as I waited for their response, but to my surprise, they said, "I understand." That moment was a turning point for me. I realized that saying no isn't about rejection. It's about honesty. It's about being truthful with yourself and others about what you can and cannot give. But here's the thing, saying no isn't always easy. It takes practice, especially if you've spent years saying yes out of guilt or obligation. Start small. The next time someone asks for something, pause before responding. Ask yourself, is this something I truly want to do? Does it align with my values and energy? If the answer is no, give yourself permission to say it. Buddhism reminds us that we are not responsible for others' happiness. Trying to meet everyone's expectations will only leave you feeling exhausted and empty. Instead, focus on what truly matters to you. When you protect your time and energy, you're not being selfish, you're being wise. And don't feel the need to over-explain. A simple, "I'm sorry, I can't," is enough. The more you practice, the more natural it will feel. The Buddha said, "Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state." This includes yourself. Don't deceive yourself into thinking you can do it all, and don't despise yourself for setting boundaries. Learning to say no is one of the greatest acts of self-compassion. It's not about shutting people out. It's about creating space for what truly matters. And when you do this, you'll find that your relationships improve. People respect you more when you respect yourself. So take this step today. Say no to what drains you. Say yes to yourself. It's not just a boundary. It's a declaration of self-love. 3. The power of self-esteem. Let me start with a question. How often do you let someone's opinion of you dictate how you feel about yourself? A passing comment, a critical word, or even a disapproving look can send your confidence tumbling. I know because I've been there. For years, my self-esteem felt like a fragile house of cards, ready to collapse at the slightest breeze of judgment. But that's when Buddhism stepped in and changed everything. Self-esteem isn't about thinking you're perfect or better than anyone else. In fact, the Buddha taught us to embrace humility. But here's the key. Humility doesn't mean thinking less of yourself. It means seeing yourself clearly, without needing others to define your worth. For the longest time, I tied my self-worth to external validation. If someone praised me, I felt good. If they criticized me, I felt worthless. It was exhausting. Then I came across a teaching from the Buddha. You, yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. Those words struck me like a bolt of lightning. I realized I had been seeking love and approval from everyone else, yet withholding it from myself. How could I ever expect to feel whole if I didn't see my own value? That's when I started a simple but profound practice: self-compassion. Self-compassion is about treating yourself with kindness, especially when you fail or fall short. Instead of berating yourself, you acknowledge your humanity. You remind yourself that everyone makes mistakes, and those mistakes don't define you. Another Buddhist practice that helped me was mindfulness. Through mindfulness, I learned to observe my thoughts without judgment. When a self-critical thought arose, instead of believing it, I'd simply notice it. Ah, there's that thought again. Over time, I began to see these thoughts for what they were, passing clouds in the sky, not the truth of who I am. Building self-esteem also means letting go of comparison. In today's world, where social media bombards us with curated snapshots of other people's lives, it's easy to feel inadequate. But Buddhism reminds us that each of us is walking our own unique path. Your worth isn't measured by someone else's success or failures. Take a moment to reflect. What would your life look like if you stopped chasing approval? If you stopped comparing yourself to others? if you started celebrating your own growth, no matter how small. The Buddha's teachings show us that true self-esteem comes from within. It's not about what you achieve or how others perceive you. It's about recognizing your intrinsic value as a human being. And when you truly see your worth, the opinions of others lose their grip on you. So let me tell you this, you are enough, right now, as you are. And the more you embrace that truth, the more unshakable your confidence will become. 4. When silence becomes your best advisor. There's something about silence that makes people uncomfortable. For years I avoided it myself. Silence felt like a void I needed to fill, with noise, conversations, or distractions. But through Buddhism, I discovered that silence isn't empty, it's full of wisdom. You see, we live in a world where noise is constant. Phones buzz, conversations flow, and our own minds chatter endlessly. But all this noise drowns out the one voice we most need to hear, our own. Buddhism teaches that silence is not just the absence of sound, it's a space where clarity emerges. It's in the silence that we confront our true selves, our fears, our desires, our thoughts. And yes, that can be uncomfortable, but it's also where transformation begins. I'll never forget the first time I intentionally sat in silence. No music, no phone, no distractions, just me and my thoughts. At first, my mind raced. I replayed conversations, worried about the future, and even thought about quitting halfway through. But as I stayed with it, something incredible happened. My thoughts began to settle, like sediment sinking to the bottom of a glass of water, and in that stillness, I started to see things more clearly. The Buddha often meditated in silence under the Bodhi tree, seeking answers not in the outside world, but within. His example taught me that silence isn't something to fear, it's a teacher. It shows us what we've been avoiding, what we need to let go of, and where we need to grow. When was the last time you let yourself be truly still? Not rushing to solve a problem or distract yourself, but just sitting with what is. Silence allows you to hear the subtle truths your busy mind often ignores. But let me be honest. Silence isn't always comfortable. At times, it can feel like a mirror reflecting parts of yourself you'd rather not see. That's why it's such a powerful practice. It helps you confront your inner world and, over time, make peace with it. Buddhist teachings encourage us to embrace silence, not just as an occasional practice, but as a way of life. You don't need hours of solitude to benefit. Start with a few minutes each day. Turn off the noise, sit quietly, and simply breathe. What you'll find in the silence is something profound. The answers you've been seeking are already within you. They're just waiting for the noise to fade so they can be heard. Silence isn't emptiness, it's fullness. It's a space where your mind clears, your heart opens, and your soul heals. So next time you feel overwhelmed, instead of reaching for a distraction, try sitting in silence. Let it guide you. Let it teach you. Because when you embrace silence, it becomes your most trusted advisor. 5. The power of being your own hero. Let me tell you something I wish I had learned much earlier in life. No one is coming to save you. It sounds harsh, doesn't it? But it's the truth that Buddhism gently but firmly teaches us. For years I waited. I waited for someone to rescue me from my struggles, to fix my problems, to make me feel complete. And every time I relied on someone else, I ended up disappointed, drained, or even more lost. The moment everything changed for me was when I realized that the hero I'd been waiting for had been there all along. It was me. The Buddha often spoke about self-reliance, saying, "You are your own refuge. There is no other refuge." These words are both liberating and intimidating. They remind us that the strength we seek isn't out there, it's within. Now, let me be clear. Being your own hero doesn't mean rejecting help or isolating yourself. It means taking responsibility for your life and your happiness. It means understanding that while others can support you, they can't do the inner work for you. That's your job, and it's one of the most empowering realizations you'll ever have. Think about it. How many times have you blamed others for your unhappiness? A partner who didn't meet your needs, a friend who let you down, or even society for not giving you the opportunities you deserve. I've been there. I've pointed fingers and played the victim. But Buddhism teaches us that true freedom comes from letting go of blame and taking full ownership of our lives. When you step into the role of your own hero, something shifts. Challenges become opportunities. Obstacles become stepping stones. Instead of waiting for someone to fix things, you ask yourself, what can I do to move forward? This mindset doesn't come naturally. It's a practice. Start small. The next time you face a problem, resist the urge to immediately seek advice or support. Sit with it. Reflect. Ask yourself what you can do with the resources you have to address it. You might be surprised at the strength and wisdom you uncover. Being your own hero also means being kind to yourself. Heroes aren't perfect. They make mistakes, they stumble, they get tired, but they keep going. Treat yourself with the same compassion and patience you would offer someone you deeply care about. The Buddha taught that the path to enlightenment is one of self-discovery and self-mastery. When you embrace this truth, you realize you don't need to wait for anyone else to save you. You already have everything you need to rise, to grow, and to thrive. So stop waiting. The hero you've been searching for is already here. Take the first step, no matter how small, and watch as your life begins to transform. 6. Let go of excess weight. Let me ask you this. What are you carrying that you no longer need? It might not be physical weight, but emotional baggage, resentments, fears, toxic relationships, or old wounds that refuse to heal. If you're feeling exhausted, it's probably because your inner backpack is overflowing. And here's the truth. Until you let go of that excess weight, you'll never feel truly free. Buddhism teaches us that clinging is one of the main causes of suffering. We hold on to things, people, and beliefs that no longer serve us because we're afraid to let go. We convince ourselves that without them, we'll lose a part of who we are. But the Buddha's wisdom is clear. Letting go isn't losing. It's gaining freedom. I used to carry so much unnecessary weight. I held on to grudges, replayed old arguments in my head, and kept people in my life who drained me. I thought if I just tried harder, if I gave more, forgave more, or tolerated more, I could make things work. But all I did was weigh myself down. Letting go doesn't mean you don't care. It doesn't mean you erase the past or ignore your responsibilities. It means recognizing when something is no longer aligned with your growth and releasing it with compassion. Start by looking at your relationships. Are there people who constantly bring negativity into your life? Those who leave you feeling drained rather than uplifted? Buddhism teaches us to cultivate loving kindness, but that doesn't mean tolerating harm. It means setting boundaries with compassion for yourself and others. Then turn inward. What thoughts or beliefs are you holding on to that no longer serve you? Are you still blaming yourself for mistakes you made years ago? Are you clinging to fear or self-doubt? These are the stones in your backpack, and every time you let one go, you feel a little lighter. Letting go isn't a one-time event. It's a practice. Start small. Identify one thing you're ready to release, whether it's a toxic relationship, a limiting belief, or a lingering resentment. Take a deep breath and make the decision to let it go. It might feel uncomfortable at first, but with each step, you'll feel a sense of freedom and clarity. The Buddha said, "In the end, only three things matter: how much you loved, how gently you lived, and how gracefully you let go of things not meant for you." Those words have guided me through some of the toughest decisions in my life. When you let go of excess weight, you create space for joy, for growth, and for peace. You realize that your value doesn't come from what you hold on to, but from who you are without the clutter. So ask yourself, what are you ready to let go of today? And when you release it, notice how much lighter you feel. This is the power of letting go, the power to walk through life free, unburdened, and fully present. 7. Freedom isn't free. Let's talk about freedom. We all want it, don't we? The freedom to live life on our terms, to make choices without fear, to feel unburdened by obligations or worries. But here's the truth that Buddhism helped me understand. Freedom isn't free. It comes with effort, responsibility, and sometimes sacrifice. For the longest time, I thought freedom was about doing whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted. But that kind of freedom, if you can even call it that, often left me feeling restless and unfulfilled. Real freedom, the kind Buddhism teaches, isn't about escaping responsibilities or avoiding discomfort. It's about finding inner peace regardless of your circumstances. The Buddha said, "True freedom comes when we liberate ourselves from attachment." At first, I didn't understand what that meant. Attachment, after all, is natural, right? We get attached to people, possessions, ideas, and even identities. But here's the problem. Attachments create chains. They make us dependent on things outside ourselves for happiness. And as long as our happiness depends on things we can't control, we'll never truly be free. One of the most liberating lessons I learned was about financial freedom. For years, I felt trapped by debt, overspending, and a constant need for more. I thought buying things would make me happy, but instead it left me feeling anxious and weighed down. Buddhism helped me see that true wealth isn't about having more, it's about needing less. Financial freedom starts with mindfulness. I began to track my spending, not with judgment, but with awareness. Where was my money going? Was it supporting my values or fueling my attachments? I learned to simplify, to let go of unnecessary expenses, and to focus on what truly mattered. But freedom isn't just about money. It's about your time, your energy, and your mental space. Are you giving these away too easily? Are you saying yes to things that don't serve you just to avoid conflict? Every time you compromise your values or ignore your needs, you give away a little bit of your freedom. Buddhism teaches us that freedom requires discipline. At first, this sounds contradictory. How can discipline lead to freedom? But think about it. When you cultivate self-discipline, you gain control over your impulses. You're no longer a slave to cravings, distractions, or fear. That's real freedom. Let me be honest, the path to freedom isn't easy. It requires effort, reflection, and a willingness to let go of what no longer serves you. But every step you take is worth it. Because when you free yourself from the chains of attachment and dependency, you discover a sense of peace that nothing can shake. Freedom isn't something you're given, it's something you earn. And once you taste it, you'll never want to go back. 8. Your happiness is in no one's hands but yours. Let me ask you something. Who holds the keys to your happiness? If your answer is anyone but yourself, then it's time for a change. I used to think my happiness depended on other people. If my partner was in a good mood, I was happy. If my friends validated me, I felt good about myself. But the moment someone let me down, my world crumbled. It was exhausting living on this emotional roller coaster, completely at the mercy of others. Then I came across one of the Buddha's teachings. Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. That hit me hard. I realized I had been outsourcing my happiness, handing over control of my emotions to people and circumstances that were never meant to carry that responsibility. Buddhism teaches us that true happiness comes from within, not from relationships, achievements, or material possessions. And this isn't just a philosophical idea, it's a practice. It's about learning to cultivate contentment regardless of what's happening around you. This doesn't mean you shut yourself off from others or stop caring about your relationships. It means understanding that no one else can fill the gaps in your life. That's your job. The first step is letting go of expectations. How often do we expect others to make us happy? A partner should always understand us, a friend should always support us, or a family member should always meet our needs. But people are human. They're flawed, just like us. When we place our happiness in their hands, we set ourselves up for disappointment. Another step is mindfulness. When you feel unhappy, pause and ask yourself, what am I really feeling and why? Often our unhappiness comes not from the situation itself, but from our reaction to it. Mindfulness helps us separate the two and see things more clearly. And then there's gratitude. Buddhism teaches us to appreciate what we have instead of yearning for what we lack. Every morning I take a moment to reflect on 3 things I'm grateful for. It sounds simple, but it's incredibly powerful. Gratitude shifts your focus from what's wrong to what's right. Here's the thing. When you take responsibility for your own happiness, you stop being a victim of life. You stop blaming others for your pain and start empowering yourself to create joy. This doesn't mean you'll never feel hurt or disappointed. You will. But when your happiness comes from within, those moments won't define you. You'll bounce back faster because you'll know your peace doesn't depend on anyone else. So let me remind you, your happiness isn't out there, waiting for someone to hand it to you. It's here, within you, waiting to be uncovered. Take ownership of it, nurture it, and watch how your life transforms. 9. Strength in adversity. Let me ask you something. How do you respond when life throws you a challenge? Do you crumble under the weight of adversity, or do you find the strength to rise? If you're like most people, you've probably felt overwhelmed at times. I know I have. But what if I told you that within every challenge lies an opportunity to grow stronger? Buddhism teaches us that suffering is an inevitable part of life. The Buddha himself said, "Pain is certain, suffering is optional." At first, I didn't fully understand what this meant. How could I feel pain without suffering? But then I realized that suffering doesn't come from the adversity itself. It comes from how we react to it. Years ago, I faced one of the most challenging periods of my life. I was dealing with loss, uncertainty, and fear all at once. I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. In my despair, I turned to Buddhist teachings for guidance. That's when I discovered the concept of dukkha, the idea that suffering arises from our resistance to reality. Instead of fighting against what was happening, I started to accept it. This wasn't about giving up or being passive. It was about recognizing that I couldn't control the situation, but I could control how I responded to it. One practice that helped me immensely was mindful breathing. Whenever I felt overwhelmed, I would pause, close my eyes, and focus on my breath. Inhale, exhale. Slowly, the chaos in my mind would begin to settle. This simple practice reminded me that even in the storm, I could find moments of calm. Buddhism also teaches us to view challenges as opportunities for growth. Every obstacle is a teacher, showing us where we need to strengthen ourselves. For example, when I faced rejection, I learned resilience. When I experienced loss, I discovered the depth of my inner strength. These lessons weren't easy, but they were invaluable. Let me tell you this: adversity doesn't define you. Your response to it does. The next time you face a challenge, ask yourself, what can I learn from this? How can I grow? These questions shift your perspective from victimhood to empowerment. And remember, you're not alone. Even the Buddha faced hardships, yet he used them to deepen his understanding and compassion. You can do the same. Strength in adversity isn't about never feeling pain. It's about finding the courage to move forward despite it. So when life feels heavy, don't run from it. Sit with it, learn from it, and know that within you lies the strength to overcome anything. 10. When you learn to be everything you need. Let me share something that changed my life. The day I realized I didn't need anyone else to feel whole. For years, I believed the opposite. I thought happiness came from relationships, success, or external approval. I thought if I could just find the right person or achieve the right goal, I'd finally feel complete. But every time I reached for those things, they slipped through my fingers. Buddhism teaches us that true fulfillment doesn't come from outside, it comes from within. This truth was hard for me to accept at first. Like so many of us, I had spent my life looking outward for validation. But the more I practiced mindfulness and self-awareness, the more I realized that everything I needed was already inside me. The Buddha said, "No one saves us but ourselves. No one can, and no one may. We ourselves must walk the path." These words struck me deeply. They reminded me that while others can support us, the journey to wholeness is ours alone. So, what does it mean to be everything you need? It starts with self-love. And let me be clear, self-love isn't selfish. It's not about putting yourself above others. It's about recognizing your own worth and treating yourself with kindness. I began this journey by spending time alone, not out of loneliness, but out of intention. I learned to enjoy my own company, to listen to my thoughts, and to care for myself the way I would care for a dear friend. At first it felt uncomfortable, but over time it became one of the most rewarding practices of my life. Another key is letting go of dependence. It's natural to rely on others for support, but when you place your happiness entirely in someone else's hands, you give away your power. Buddhism teaches us to cultivate detachment, not from love or connection, but from the need to control or cling. When you let go of this need, you find freedom. And here's the beautiful part. When you stop needing others to complete you, your relationships improve. You no longer approach them from a place of lack or desperation. Instead, you connect with people out of genuine love and respect. The journey to becoming everything you need isn't easy. It requires introspection, patience, and a willingness to face your fears. But the rewards are profound. When you realize you are your own source of strength, love, and happiness, you become unshakable. So take this step today. Begin the journey of looking inward. Spend time with yourself. Practice self-compassion. Let go of the idea that someone else will fix you, because the truth is, you don't need fixing. You're already whole. You just need to see it. And when you do, you'll discover a freedom and peace that no one can take away. As we come to the end of this journey, I hope these teachings have sparked something within you, a realization that you are stronger, wiser, and more complete than you ever imagined. Buddhism reminds us that true peace and fulfillment come from within, not from others. When you embrace this truth, you'll find that life feels lighter, more meaningful, and infinitely freer. Now, I want to hear from you. What part of today's message resonated with you the most? Was there a lesson or a moment that made you stop and reflect? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and your insights might just inspire someone else. And if you've found value in what we've shared today, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Together, we'll continue exploring these timeless truths, learning and growing along the way. Thank you for joining me on this path. Until next time, remember, the answers you seek are already within you. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.